Okay, today is May 9th, 2014, and we want to take a look at Emmanuel Levinas. Although last time we discussed a commentary on Levinas by Jacques Derrida, this time we want to take a look at Levinas's original work, his Totality and Infinity. It was published in French in 1961. But it was published in the U.S. in 1969 in translation. So we're going to take a look at this original work, and what is profoundly unique about it is that Levinas, in a time when metaphysics is proposed as being dead, back in the 60s, in 1961, during the emergence of postmodern thought, and the anti-philosophy and anti-metaphysics, Levinas proposes a new metaphysics, and he takes up the project of the Logos again, which is a metaphysical project. And so he gives us, but he frames it within a phenomenology. So he's going to have a phenomenology of new metaphysics. It's a phenomenology of the Logos, and it is primarily a triad. So the overall triad I'll give to you, and then we'll go over the specific elements of the phenomenology. The overall triad is interiority, exteriority, and coincidence. Interiority, exteriority, and coincidence. And interiority addresses the living presence of the other that expresses itself in all of creation. And exteriority is basically the Dekunta threshold, or what he calls the conversation threshold of dialogue between existentially concerned selves who want to reach essence and define the essence of the other that exists in all of creation that is trying to emerge. And so that second moment is the threshold of dialogue. Then the third moment of coincidence is the actual articulation of the content that comes out of that dialogue. And it's articulated as what Levinas metaphorically calls face, the face of the other. And so there's an internal otherness of transcendence that is trying to emerge. We share our individual versions of how we perceive that, and in a conversation of dialogue exchange. And then out of that dialogue, we articulate a singularity of the face of transcendence as coincidence. And those three moments all fit into the phenomenology, and I'll tell you where they fit because it'll help you to understand how he's doing this overlay. How do you overlay a metaphysic on top of a phenomenology? And so the way he does that is he takes the first moment of the triad of the Logos, interiority, and he places that on top of what he calls psychism, or what we discussed in phenomenology as the moment of the psyche that does the grasping of the figurative aspects of otherness, that draws the thought picture. That's the work of the psyche. And then so that's where he's going to stack his concept of interiority of the Logos. And then the exteriority of the Logos is going to be the Dekunta threshold, where we take that psyche presentation and present it in dialogue with other existentially concerned selves. That'll be his place to stack the second moment. And then his third moment of coincidence is going to be the phenomenology when it reaches that point of articulating notion of the true. And the articulation, when it transfers when we transfer to the cognitive aspect, that will be Levinas' third moment of coincidence. So it's for him it's psyche, threshold, and notion. Psyche, threshold, and notion in phenomenology become interiority, exteriority, and coincidence. Psyche, threshold, and notion. The three moments in phenomenology of psyche, notion, psyche, threshold, and notion. So that's how he fits it. That's how he fits his. That's how he can say that we can take phenomenology and actually write a new metaphysic. So metaphysics isn't dead, it just needs to be understood within the context of the new emerging phenomenology. So he does this by, first of all, taking up the realm of the psyche. And he says we begin with the quest, and he says of a true selfhood. He says the self recognizes that that selfhood is in peril. He calls this the hour of difference. It's that moment that the self's existential awareness arises of a difference between true self and non-self. The self is interrogated to seek transcendence over the non-self of a eros-type desire of possession, and we want to transcend that entrapment in eros desire. So he says there's a birth of metaphysical desire. The self engages in a project of metaphysical desire, and the object of metaphysical desire is the beyond or the epikeina of a beyond of any articulated completion. So for Levinas, the true beyond is a beyond that cannot be conceptualized. The true beyond, the true epikeina, cannot be concretized in any kind of an articulated final document or final schematic. So the epikeina is always a beyond as a beyond of any completeness. So the first subjective moment for Levinas is very important for him because he has to establish the foundation, which is a presupposition, but the foundation for his metaphysic, and it's going to be incarnation. He says that incarnation is not God incarnating one man, Jesus of Nazareth. Incarnation is a concept that speaks to creation. Incarnation is intertwined with creation, and creation was an incarnating of all sensate existence by the epikeina other at the moment of creation from the very beginning. So he proposes a doctrine of universal incarnation by the epikeina other of transcendence. And he gives it 6 moments here. First is irreversibility. The sensate same goes into the epikeina other differently than the epikeina other goes into the sensate finite existence. The epikeina other is always engaged in an existence that continually recovers its own identity after passing through finitude. It's always an identity of recovery after passing through finitude. There's a primordial relation from the very beginning of creation between this epikeina other and the sensate finitude, and the incarnating of finitude should be looked at as sojourning. The epikeina other goes outside of itself in a sojourning, transitory experience, and then transits through finitude, and then reclaims its own transcendent identity. So the key term transcendence equals the movement of identification through incarnation. Transcendence equals the movement of identification through incarnation. And he calls incarnation an incarnation that is seen as in or under all of sensate finitude. So the epikeina other is to be conceived of as in or under all sensate finitude. So the project of the subject of self, seeking this new selfhood, is a project of seeking the new site of dwelling, and we are in an attention between dependence and freedom on this epikaina other. And the site of dwelling is a medium of existence. It's a new way of existing in finitude. It takes up an occupying, which is measured against understanding that all of sensate experience is caught up in a primordial occupying of sight. So the occupying of the new site of dwelling is something that takes place in all of finitude, and it's going on all the time. And so we have a new perspective of alterity. Alterity, there's an inversion of our understanding of alterity, because alterity is no longer duality. Alterity is emergence of the incarnate epikaina. So there's no longer the possibility of a duality. Duality has been replaced by emerging incarnate epikaina, which is taking place now. So the first moment of logos is going to be interiority, and that's going to be the articulating the site of dwelling in a figurative way. And he says it's always an infinity. It exceeds any concept. It designates transcendence. And it always, therefore, is at a distance because we can't totally capture it. It's always a metaphysic that includes sensation, which is basically at the level of sensation we form generalizations of the units of meaning. But then we couple that with light, which is the idea of the otherness of the epikaina. And those two together can be synthesized into an intelligibility of sensation plus light, where we actually give the unit of meaning a deeper significance. So it takes us through what he gives here 5 steps of this initial stage. 1, we posit a horizon of the epikaina other to open the finite existence. And 2, we apprehend the individual generality of the units of meaning in a situation. 3rd, we turn inward to contemplate the light of the transcendence. And 4, we form the intelligibility that measures each singularity against the horizon of a prefigured sign. It's still a figure, it's still a thought picture type image, but it's kind of in a deeper significance, a pre-sign stage. And all duality is negated. Instead, we take up the concept of emergence. And that takes him through his first moment of logos. And he's ready to take the self on to the second moment of logos, which is what he calls the conversation threshold, not the Dokunta threshold, but the conversation threshold, where we acquire the aspects of signification. So here we acquire the aspects of signification. That's a presentation of the other called face, which is presented as expression. It's a dialogue as a mutual teaching. We offer our individual figure of measure and exchange with other individuals who present their figure of measure within the tone of a conversation of thematization. The theme of emerging incarnation is the context within which the conversation takes place. So it's always a thematic dialogue at the composition threshold, of the conversation threshold, and that forms the uplifting of each unit of meaning to a deeper significance, and takes us on to the transition to cognitive work. So when we transfer into the cognitive work, we're getting into the notion of the true. And Levinas gives us 6 aspects. He says, number 1, it will be a theory of infinity. infinity as surplus, and infinity as the idea that we form in subjectivity contribute to the articulation of the notion of the true. It's a metaphysic which is above all complete conceptualization, so is a beyond conceptualization. And he gives a great deal of attention to intersubjectivity from the previous moment of the conversational threshold, or Dakunta threshold. He calls it a psychism event because it is an event of being. It emerges out of that first moment of the psyche. It ends up being a concrete conjunction of signs, but it is so it's dependent on the initial psychism, but it breaks with the psychism to transition from the psyche to the cogito of intelligibility. So now we transition to a self as cogito of intelligibility and transition out of psyche. So from psyche to cogito. And it is the articulation of metaphysical relation. The eschatological aspect is coupled with the originary aspect of infinity, and recollection and reason are enlisted as we form this theory. So it's cogito, but it will enlist the psyche of the unconscious and the motivational base. And he says that the cogito self takes a stance outside the self and takes up a gaze that integrates the cogito into the whole, allowing for the openness to revision and for the necessity of self-model also, not just historical model. And as far as the primacy of history goes, he says that interiority is temporarily bracketed to give primacy to history here, so that a concrete model may be formed. So there's a temporary bracketing of interiority, and intentionality is included in the sign model as part of that uplifting rupture of the emergence of the incarnate epikaina otherness. So that takes us to the third moment, and from the third moment we've got our metaphysic of logos formed, and we need to take this psychism plus cogito intelligibility and our formed model and enter into actuality, but first we pass through the axis threshold of true subjectivity, and this is where he defines true subjectivity. So it is a self that exists in a tension between atheistic separated being, and atheistic separation is required by the concept of infinity. The other always remains transcendent, and self takes up an economy of existence. And then the second moment in tension, there's a tension of enjoining a quest for aletheia truth. The self is to rejoin the epikaina otherness, so the idea of infinity guides the quest for this project of truth. And for Levinas, that's what we're involved in. We're involved in a project of truth in acquiring the presentation of the epikaina of otherness that has been universally incarnated. So when he gets to the quest of truth, he says basically the epiphany of Ephes is depicted as an erupting out of the need of the soul. Truth is acquired as an epiphany at a distance. It's not content-based. We don't participate out of a defined content model. There's no specific hollowed-out outline wanting to be filled. Infinity is not a cognized object. It's motivation-based, and we're motivated and aroused to the notion of infinity, and we couple that with measure. Now, measure is the measurement we receive by the presentation of the face of epikaina from intersubjectivity intersubjectivity at the conversation threshold. So when we enter into actuality, we still will re-engage with intersubjective communal dialogue. We never escape the intersubjective. That basically is Levinas' version of transcendence, is this intersubjective dialogue within the threshold, Takunta threshold. So he says basically we discover the triad of logos, we posit the triad of logos, we don't form concrete models. Our sign model is very, very open and abstract. It lacks specific content, and that content that we do acquire is content that we acquire through intersubjectivity, of engaging in dialogue with other selves in a communal activity that is actually a sharing of what he calls the behaviors of the other. So your experiences of your encounter with the other of the epikina are shared along with my behaviors of the epikina other in the infinitude. And by our sharing of behaviors through reciprocal speech acts, those reciprocal speech acts will lead to an emergence of the essence of the singularity of the epikina. And the singularity of the epikina is called infinity. So we are trying to define the face of infinity, the face of the epikina beyond. And we do this through dialogue and critique and the sharing of the behaviors of the epikina other. And we got in at 22 minutes. That's very good. So we'll wrap it up at 22. Very good.